In the silence between stars, time moves differently. This is something the Verith Collective understood before most species in the galaxy had learned to walk upright. They had watched the birth of nebulae, catalogued the death of suns, and written treaties with civilizations whose names have long since been forgotten. They had charted the expansion of the universe itself, and they had done so with the quiet confidence of those who believed themselves eternal. Ambassador Corvith San had served the collective for 847 standard cycles. He had negotiated the surrender of the Meridian hegemony. He had witnessed the signing of the Pale Accords that ended the Second Void War. He had spoken words that moved fleets and toppled governments. But now, standing at the observation window of the diplomatic vessel Ascending Light, watching the blue-white marble of Earth grow larger in the viewport, he felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Uncertainty. The ship's environmental systems hummed with perfect efficiency, maintaining the precise atmospheric composition that his biology required. Outside, the void stretched infinite and cold, indifferent to the fates of nations and the fears of ambassadors. Earth hung there, deceptively peaceful, wrapped in swirls of white cloud and the deep blue of oceans that his databases told him covered 70% of its surface. Such a small world. Such an insignificant species. Or so they had all believed. Ambassador? Corvith did not turn immediately. He let the word hang in the recycled air of the observation deck, giving himself one final moment of stillness before the weight of what was coming settled fully upon his shoulders. Yes, Attendant Myrif? We will enter their orbital space in approximately 40 standard minutes. Their traffic control has acknowledged our approach and assigned us a docking vector. Of course they have. Corvith's voice carried the weight of exhaustion that went beyond the physical. They are nothing if not efficient. He finally turned to face his attendant, a younger member of his species whose scales still held the vibrant blue of youth. Myrit's eyes were wide with barely concealed nervousness. Understandable, given what they both knew, given what was coming. You have reviewed the briefing materials? Corvith asked. Yes, Ambassador, though I confess I find them incomplete. That is because they are incomplete. There is much about the humans that we do not understand, much that we chose not to learn when we still had the luxury of ignorance. Myrith hesitated, a question clearly forming behind those bright young eyes. Ambassador, may I speak freely? Corvith gestured his permission with a subtle movement of his secondary arms. The Council's decision, the ultimatum that was delivered. Myrith paused, as if the words themselves were dangerous. I have heard whispers. The diplomatic staff speaks of it only in coded phrases. What happened in those chambers? Corvith turned back to the viewport, to that small blue world growing ever larger. What happened, he said slowly, is that we discovered we understood nothing at all. 43 cycles ago, the war had seemed almost distant. The Kalari Dominion had been expanding for decades, consuming system after system with the methodical patience of a species that measured time in geological epochs. They were not like the Verith Collective. They did not negotiate, did not compromise, did not recognize the concept of diplomatic resolution. To the Kalari, the galaxy was simply territory waiting to be claimed, and other species were either useful resources or obstacles to be removed. The collective had watched their expansion with growing concern, but no real alarm.
The Kalari were far away, separated by vast stretches of uninhabited space and the territories of a dozen neutral powers. There would be time, the High Council had reasoned, time to prepare, time to build alliances, time to find solutions that did not require the expenditure of Verith lives.
They had been wrong.
The neutral powers fell faster than anyone had predicted. The Kolari did not conquer through brute force alone. They corrupted, subverted, and consumed. Their biology was adaptive in ways that defied conventional understanding. They could absorb other species, integrate their knowledge, their technology, their very neural patterns into the Kolari collective consciousness.
By the time the collective realized the true nature of the threat, 3 of their border worlds had already gone silent.
Corveth remembered receiving the news of Valethra Prime's fall. He had been in his quarters aboard the diplomatic station above the collective's homeworld, reviewing trade agreements with a minor species whose name he could no longer recall. His personal communication device had chimed with the priority override that signaled emergency communications from the High Council.
The message had been simple, brutal, and impossible to misunderstand. Valethra Prime had been a world of 4 billion souls. The Kalari had arrived with a fleet of 700 vessels, emerging from fold space with no warning and no communication. The planetary defense grid had held for approximately 3 hours. The ground forces had lasted another 2. By the time the message reached Corveth, there was nothing left to save. The Kalari did not leave survivors. They did not take prisoners. They simply absorbed. The population of an entire world reduced to raw material for the Dominion's endless expansion. That was when the real fear had begun. Ambassador, we are receiving a communication request from the human station.
Corveth pulled himself from the weight of memory and focused on the present. The observation deck's ambient lighting had shifted slightly, indicating they had crossed into the humans' claimed territorial space.
Put it through.
The holographic display materialized in the air before him, resolving into the image of a human female. She appeared young by their species' standards, perhaps in her 4th decade, with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes that held the peculiar intensity Corveth had learned to associate with human attention.
Verath, diplomatic vessel Ascending Light. This is Station Commander Chen of Gateway 1. Welcome to Earth orbital space. We have you on approach vector 73 and you are cleared for docking at berth 12. Do you require any special accommodations for your delegation?
Corveth studied the human's face, searching for any sign of hostility, triumph, or mockery. He found nothing but professional courtesy.
No special accommodations are required, Commander. We thank you for your efficiency.
Standard protocol, Ambassador. We'll have a greeting party waiting at the berth. Gateway 1 control out.
The image dissolved, leaving Corveth staring at the empty air where it had been. She seemed calm, Myrith observed. Yes. Is that normal for humans? Corveth considered the question carefully. I do not know what is normal for humans, he admitted. That is rather the problem.
The ascending light slid into its designated berth with the smooth precision of collective engineering. The docking clamps engaged with barely a vibration, and the atmospheric seals confirmed compatible pressure and composition. Standard procedure, performed countless times at countless stations across 100 worlds. And yet Corveth found himself hesitating at the airlock. He had walked into hostile negotiations before. He had faced species that despised the collective, that had sworn blood oaths against his people, that had decorated their meeting halls with the trophies of fallen Verith warriors. He had never felt the particular weight that pressed against his thorax now. Ambassador?
Myrith's voice was quiet, concerned.
I am well, attendant, merely preparing myself.
The airlock cycled open.
On the other side stood 3 humans, arranged in what Corveth recognized as a standard diplomatic greeting formation. 2 wore the gray uniforms of what he understood to be their military service, their faces professionally neutral. Between them stood an older human male, perhaps in his 6th or 7th decade, with gray streaking his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years and experience.
Ambassador Corveth San, the older human said, his voice measured and warm. I'm Director Marcus Webb, Earth's representative for the Galactic Council. Welcome to Gateway 1.
Corveth inclined his head in the collective's gesture of respectful greeting. Director Webb, your welcome is appreciated.
Webb smiled, that peculiar expression that humans use to convey so many different emotional states. Please, come with me. We've prepared a conference room where we can speak privately.
They walked through the station's corridors, Corveth cataloging every detail with the trained eye of 8 centuries of diplomatic service. The architecture was functional rather than elegant. Clean lines, efficient use of space, nothing that spoke of the aesthetic excess that characterized most spacefaring civilizations. The humans they passed nodded respectfully, but did not stare, did not whisper, showed none of the behaviors he would expect from a species that had just been threatened with extinction by the Galactic Council.
It was unsettling.
Your station is impressive, Corveth offered, more to break the silence than from genuine admiration.
Thank you, Ambassador. Gateway 1 was our first orbital station capable of receiving non-human vessels. We've made some improvements over the years.
Indeed. How long has it been in operation?
About 18 years now. Corveth absorbed this information without visible reaction. 18 years. The Verath Collective had been building stations for 15,000 years. Humans had achieved interstellar capability barely 3 generations ago. And yet here he was, walking through their halls, seeking their help. The conference room was modest by the standards Corveth was accustomed to. A simple oval table of some dark wood analog, surrounded by chairs designed to accommodate multiple species' physiologies. A viewport dominated one wall, offering a view of Earth's curved horizon and the stars beyond.
Please sit, Webb gestured to the far end of the table. Can we offer you any refreshment? We've attempted to synthesize several Verath beverages, though I can't promise authenticity.
That will not be necessary. Thank you for the consideration. Webb took a seat across from Corveth, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. The military officers remained standing by the door, quiet and watchful.
For a long moment, neither spoke.
Then Webb leaned forward slightly, his fingers interlaced on the table before him. Ambassador, we both know why you're here. Perhaps it would save time if we dispensed with the diplomatic preliminaries.
Corveth felt something shift in his chest. Relief, perhaps, or resignation. You are direct, Director Webb.
When circumstances call for it.
Very well. Corveth drew a breath, his secondary arms folding tight against his torso in the unconscious gesture of his species' anxiety. I am here because the Galactic Council has made a grave error, and because I believe your species may be the only ones capable of helping us survive the consequences.
Webb's expression did not change. Go on.
43 cycles ago, the Kalari Dominion began their expansion into territories claimed by the Collective and our allies. Since then, we have lost 17 worlds, approximately 48 billion citizens, and nearly 60% of our military capability. The Meridian hegemony has fallen entirely. The Pale Accord nations have surrendered or been consumed. The collective stands alone against an enemy that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be stopped, and cannot be satisfied with anything less than total absorption. He paused, watching Webb's face for any reaction. The human remained still, listening. One standard week ago, the remnants of the Galactic Council convened in emergency session. Representatives from what remains of our allied civilizations gathered to discuss possible responses to the Kolari threat. During this session, a faction led by High Counselor Varric proposed a controversial strategy. "The ultimatum to Earth," Webb said quietly. Corveth's secondary arms twitched. "You know." "We received communication of the Council's demands approximately 6 days ago, Ambassador. We've had some time to consider our response."
Then you understand the situation. High Counselor Varric convinced the Council that humanity's neutral stance was unacceptable, given the existential nature of the threat. The ultimatum demanded that Earth commit its full military resources to the war effort under Council command, that humans surrender control of their autonomous defensive systems, and that failure to comply within 30 standard days would result in
"The targeting of Earth for preemptive military action," Webb finished, "to prevent humanity from potentially allying with the Kolari should we be absorbed."
"Yes." Webb was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, almost gentle. "Ambassador, do you know why I agreed to meet with you today?" "I assumed it was to discuss terms of negotiation." "No." Webb shook his head slowly. "I agreed to meet with you because our intelligence suggested you were among the Council members who opposed the ultimatum. Is that correct?" Corveth hesitated. To admit dissent within the Council was to acknowledge weakness, division, vulnerability. But what did such considerations matter now? "I voted against the motion," he admitted, "as did 7 others. We were outnumbered." "Why did you oppose it?" The question was simple, but something in Webb's tone suggested it carried weight far beyond its words. Corveth considered his answer carefully. "Because it was unjust. Because humanity had done nothing to warrant such treatment except refuse to become entangled in a war that was not of your making. Because threatening an innocent species with destruction simply because we failed to protect ourselves seemed—" He trailed off, searching for the right word. "Desperate?" Webb offered. "Yes, desperate. And desperate actions rarely produce wise outcomes." Webb nodded slowly. "Ambassador, I'm going to share something with you. Something that hasn't left this room since we received the Council's ultimatum." He pressed a control on the table's surface, and a holographic display materialized in the air between them. It showed a star chart, the local region of the galaxy, with territorial boundaries marked in various colors. "This is the current state of the conflict as your Council understands it." Webb touched a control, and the display shifted, boundaries redrawing themselves, vast swaths of territory changing from the colors of Council civilizations to the deep red of Kolari control. And this is the actual situation as of 72 hours ago. The Kolari advance had been far more extensive than the Council knew. Entire sectors that should have been safely behind Allied lines were now marked as contested or lost. The collective's homeworld, which intelligence had placed weeks away from any possible threat, now sat less than 3 standard travel days from the nearest confirmed Kolari presence. "How do you have this information?" Corveth demanded, his voice hoarse. "We've been watching, Ambassador, quietly, carefully, without drawing attention to ourselves. We've been watching for quite some time." But the Council's intelligence network
has been compromised. The Kalari have been intercepting and manipulating your communications for at least 18 months. What your council sees as an organized retreat is actually a coordinated collapse. What they believe to be defensive lines are gaps waiting to be exploited.
Corveth's mind raced, trying to process the implications. If this is true, if this is accurate...
It is. Then the collective has perhaps days, not weeks. The Council's ultimatum to Earth is meaningless because there will be no Council left to enforce it.
Webb leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. That's one way to look at it.
How else is there to look at it?
Ambassador, when your Council threatened Earth, what did they expect would happen? Corveth felt a flush of shame color his scales. They expected you to capitulate, to recognize the hopelessness of resistance and submit to Council authority. And if we didn't?
Then, Corveth faltered, then they would have made an example, demonstrated that neutrality was not an option, that all species must unite against the Kalari or face consequences.
I see. Webb's voice remained calm, almost philosophical. And in their calculation, how long would it take their combined remaining fleets to neutralize Earth's defenses?
The military advisors estimated perhaps 3 days for orbital supremacy, another week for planetary occupation.
3 days. Webb smiled, but there was no humor in it. Ambassador, did your council bother to investigate Earth's defensive capabilities before issuing their ultimatum?
They reviewed the standard databases. Your species is young, your technology derivative, your military resources limited to what our public records show, to what we've allowed the galaxy to see. Webb stood, moving to the viewport, his silhouette framed against the stars. Ambassador Corveth, do you know what humanity's defining characteristic is? What makes us different from the Verath collective, the Meridian hegemony, the Pale Accord nations?
We remember our wars. Webb's voice was quiet, almost sad. Not just the outcomes, the treaties, the borders redrawn. We remember the trenches and the camps, the firebombed cities and the atomic ruins. We remember what it costs when one group of humans decides another group of humans doesn't deserve to exist. We carry those memories in our collective consciousness like scar tissue, painful, ugly, but informative.
He turned to face Corveth. When we reached the stars and discovered we weren't alone, we had a choice. We could have tried to become like the civilizations we encountered, built empires, projected power, played the games of galactic politics. Some of us wanted to. But you didn't. No. Instead, we did something that apparently confused everyone who was watching. We stayed quiet. We built, we learned, we traded when it was profitable, and stayed home when it wasn't. We let the galaxy believe we were insignificant, primitive, not worth the effort of conquest or the trouble of alliance.
A deliberate strategy.
A survival strategy. Because we knew something that no other species in this galaxy seems to understand. Webb's eyes met Corveth's, and for the first time, the ambassador saw something in those human depths that made his scales prickle with instinctive alarm.
We knew that eventually someone would threaten us, and when that happened, we wanted to be ready.
The hours that followed blurred together in Corveth's memory, a cascade of revelations that reshaped everything he thought he understood about the small blue world and its unremarkable inhabitants.
Webb took him to a secondary command center deep within Gateway 1's supposedly civilian superstructure. As they descended through security checkpoints that scanned for biological, chemical, radiological, and technological threats Corveth had never encountered, the nature of the station itself seemed to shift around them.
What had appeared to be a modest trading post revealed itself, layer by layer, as something else entirely.
The surface facilities handle approximately 30% of our interstellar trade, Webb explained as they walked through corridors that hummed with barely contained energy. The rest of the station serves other purposes.
The command center was vast, its walls covered with displays showing real-time data from across the solar system and beyond. Human personnel moved between stations with quiet efficiency, speaking in low voices, their attention focused on tasks that Corveth could not begin to comprehend. Director Webb, are those
Fleet deployment monitors, yes. You're looking at the current position of every human combat vessel in active service.
Corveth stared at the displays. Thousands of points of light, arranged in patterns that spoke of military organization on a scale he had not imagined possible.
How many ships?
Currently, approximately 47,000 combat-capable vessels, ranging from single-pilot interceptors to carriers capable of deploying 300 fighters each. That's not counting our automated defense platforms, of which there are substantially more. The number was staggering. The entire Varath collective, at the height of its military power, had fielded perhaps 12,000 vessels. The Council's combined remaining forces amounted to less than 8,000.
This is impossible, Corveth breathed. The resources required, the industrial capacity.
We've had nearly a century to prepare, Ambassador, and unlike most spacefaring civilizations, we didn't spread ourselves thin, colonizing every marginally habitable world we encountered. We stayed concentrated, focused. Every mining operation, every factory, every shipyard in this system has been working toward a single purpose.
Defense.
Survival. Webb corrected gently. We're not warriors, Ambassador. We're not conquerors. We're survivors. And survivors prepare for the worst while hoping for the best.
A young officer approached, handing Webb a tablet. The director glanced at its contents, his expression unreadable.
It seems word of your arrival has reached the Council remnants. High Counselor Varric is demanding to know why you've come to Earth.
What should I tell him? That depends. Webb handed the tablet back to the officer. On what you want to happen next.
Corveth felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. 8 centuries of diplomatic experience, and he had never faced a decision quite like this.
Director Webb, if I understand correctly, you are showing me all of this for a reason. You want something from the collective.
Yes.
And if I refuse? If I return to the Council and report what I've seen, warn them of your true capabilities?
Webb smiled faintly. Then we will deal with whatever comes. But I don't think you'll do that, Ambassador.
Why not? Because you've already told me everything I need to know about who you are. You voted against the ultimatum. You came here seeking help, not confrontation. You've spent 800 years trying to prevent wars, not start them.
He stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper.
Ambassador Corveth, the Varath Collective is going to fall. Perhaps not tomorrow, perhaps not next week, but soon. The Kalari cannot be stopped by your remaining forces, and the Council is too fractured, too compromised, too afraid to mount an effective response. You know this.
Yes, Corveth admitted, the word carrying the weight of a civilization's death sentence.
But it doesn't have to end that way. Humanity has the capability to engage the Kalari effectively. Our technology, our tactics, He paused, seeming to search for the right word. Our nature makes us uniquely suited to fight an enemy that adapts and absorbs. We've spent our entire history fighting ourselves. We understand adaptable enemies in ways that civilizations like yours do not.
You would help us?
We would help you, but not under council command. Not as subordinates to a governing body that just threatened to destroy our home world. We would help as equals, as partners. Corveth's mind reeled. The council would never accept such terms. Then the council will fall, and humanity will do what we've always done: survive, remember, and rebuild. It's not our preferred outcome, Ambassador, but we've planned for it.
You've planned for the extinction of the Galactic Council?
We've planned for every contingency we could imagine. That's what survivors do.
The ambassador stood in silence, processing the impossible scope of what he was being told. A species barely out of its home world's gravity well, preparing for wars on a galactic scale. A civilization dismissed as primitive, secretly building the most formidable military force in known space. A people who remembered their own capacity for destruction and had channeled it into something terrifying and transcendent.
"Why tell me this?" he finally asked. "Why show me your secrets?" "Because in approximately 4 hours, the Kalari are going to launch a surprise attack on the Collective's remaining core worlds. An attack that your council doesn't know is coming because they're still receiving falsified intelligence reports. And because when that attack begins, we're going to intervene whether you accept our terms or not."
Corveth felt the blood drain from his extremities. 4 hours?
Their forward elements are already in position. We've been tracking them since they entered council space. Then warn the council. Send them your intelligence. We tried. 3 days ago, we transmitted everything we knew through every diplomatic channel available. Our communications were blocked, rerouted, or ignored. High Counselor Varric has apparently decided that Earth's warnings are a trick to distract from our refusal to comply with the ultimatum. The irony was almost too bitter to contemplate. The Council, so focused on punishing humanity for its neutrality, was about to be destroyed by the very enemy they had demanded humans help fight.
What would you have me do? Corveth asked. Go back to your ship. Contact whoever in the council will still listen to you. Tell them what you've seen, what you've learned. Prepare them for what's coming.
And if they won't listen?
Then at least they'll have warning. What they do with it is their choice. Webb's expression softened. Ambassador, you asked why I opposed the ultimatum. It wasn't because I thought humans were too weak to fight or too frightened to act. It was because I believed that forcing us into an alliance through threats would make us enemies rather than partners. I still believe that. He extended his hand, that peculiar human gesture of trust and agreement. But I also believe that you are not our enemy. That the Vareth Collective, for all its flaws, has been a force for stability and peace in this galaxy for 15,000 years. And that losing you would diminish us all. Corveth looked at the extended hand, at the simple human gesture that somehow carried the weight of 2 civilizations' futures. Slowly, carefully, he reached out with his own primary appendage and clasped it. The return journey to the ascending light took only minutes, but each step felt like it covered light years. Mirith was waiting at the airlock, anxiety radiating from every scale. Ambassador, we've been receiving urgent communications from the Council. High Counselor Varric is demanding. I know.
Korveth moved past his attendant, his mind already racing through the communications he would need to make, the arguments he would need to construct. Prepare a priority channel to the collective's emergency response command. Direct encryption, maximum security.
At once, Ambassador. But what should I tell the High Counselor?
Korveth paused at the entrance to the ship's communication center. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what was coming. The fear, the grief, the terrible knowledge that everything he had worked for across 8 centuries was about to be tested in fire. "Tell him," Korveth said slowly, "that humanity has declined the Council's generous ultimatum. Tell him that Earth remains neutral."
Mirith's eyes widened. "Ambassador, that will—"
"I know what it will do. Now go."
The communication center was small but efficient, equipped with arrays capable of reaching any point in Council space within minutes. Korveth seated himself at the primary console and began inputting the codes that would connect him to the collective's military command. The connection took longer than expected, a bad sign, suggesting that communication networks were already being disrupted. When the holographic display finally materialized, it showed a face that Korveth had known for 4 centuries.
"Korveth, what is the meaning of this? Why are you on Earth?"
Fleet Commander Duresh looked exhausted. Her scales faded to the gray-blue of severe stress, and her posture radiating the particular tension of military command in crisis.
Duresh, listen to me carefully. In approximately 3.5 hours, the Kalari are going to launch a coordinated attack on our core worlds. That's impossible. Our intelligence shows. Your intelligence is compromised. The Kalari have been feeding false data to the Council for 18 months. The defensive lines you believe are holding don't exist. The reinforcement fleets you're expecting have already been destroyed.
Darish stared at him, disbelief warring with the trust of centuries of friendship. "How do you know this?" "The humans. They've been monitoring the situation. They have intelligence capabilities far beyond anything we suspected."
"The humans?" Duresh's voice sharpened. "Korveth, the Council just threatened to destroy their planet. Why would they share intelligence with us?"
Because they're going to intervene regardless. Because they've been preparing for a conflict like this since before they achieved faster-than-light travel. Because they are not what we thought they were, Duresh. They are not what anyone thought they were.
A long moment of silence stretched between them. In the background of Duresh's display, Korveth could see officers moving with the controlled urgency of imminent crisis.
"Assuming I believe you," Duresh said finally, "what would you have me do?"
"Redirect every available ship to defensive positions around the home world. Abandon the outer systems. They're already lost. Concentrate your remaining forces and prepare to hold until the humans arrive."
"Until the humans arrive?" Duresh repeated, her voice flat with disbelief. "You're asking me to stake the survival of the collective on the intervention of a species that was just declared an enemy of the Council?"
"I'm asking you to stake the survival of the collective on the only option that gives us a chance of survival."
Another pause. Korveth could see Duresh wrestling with the impossibility of the situation, the weight of a decision that would determine the fate of billions. "How long?" she asked.
"Until the Kalari attack? Approximately 3 hours now. Until the humans arrive?" Korveth thought of the displays he had seen in the command center, the thousands of ships arranged in patterns that spoke of power beyond comprehension. "I don't know, but they will come." "You trust them?" Korveth considered the question.
I trust that they understand something we never did. I trust that they prepared while we assumed ourselves invincible. I trust that they are survivors."
Duresh nodded slowly. "I'll contact Admiral Varath. She commands the Third Fleet. She's always been skeptical of Council intelligence. If anyone will listen, she will."
Good. And Daresh?
Yes? The Council is about to become irrelevant. What matters now is saving as many of our people as possible. Do whatever you have to do."
The connection ended.
Korveth sat in the sudden silence, feeling the weight of centuries pressing against his consciousness. He had done what he could. The rest was beyond his control. Through the viewport, he could see Earth still hanging in the void, blue and white and impossibly peaceful. Somewhere on that world and on the stations and ships that surrounded it, a species that had been dismissed as primitive and inconsequential was preparing for war. The first wave of the Kalari attack came 47 minutes ahead of the human prediction.
Korveth was still aboard the Ascending Light, monitoring communications from Council space when the emergency channels began flooding with reports of contact. The Kalari emerged from fold space in coordinated strikes across 12 systems simultaneously, their forces appearing with perfect timing behind what remained of the Council's defensive lines.
The displays in the ship's communications center painted a picture of chaos and collapse. The collective Second Fleet, positioned to defend the shipyards at Valeth Station, was caught between two Kalari battle groups and annihilated in the first 8 minutes of engagement. The Pale Accord's remnant forces, gathered for a desperate counteroffensive, were ambushed before they could even form attack patterns. And at the collective's homeworld, the planet that had been the center of Varath's urbanization for 15 millennia, 600 Kalari vessels emerged from fold space directly into high orbit.
"Ambassador," Mirit's voice was barely a whisper, "the homeworld's planetary defense grid is firing."
Korveth watched the displays, his heart's beating in sync with the pulsing lights that represented weapons fire. The collective had invested centuries in those defenses: orbital platforms, ground-based batteries, automated interceptor networks. They had been designed to repel any conventional attack indefinitely.
They lasted 23 minutes.
The Kalari didn't fight like any enemy the collective had faced before. They absorbed weapons fire rather than evading it, their organic hulls regenerating damage faster than conventional weapons could inflict it. When they closed to engagement range, they didn't fire missiles or energy weapons. They attached, merged, consumed. Ships that had served the collective for centuries became part of the Kalari fleet within moments of contact. Crews that might have been taken prisoner were instead integrated, their knowledge and skills added to the enemy's collective consciousness. "The Third Fleet is engaging," Myrith reported, a note of desperate hope in his voice. Admiral Varath had listened. Against all protocol, against the explicit orders of High Counselor Varric, she had redirected her forces to defend the homeworld. 1,400 ships, the largest concentration of collective military power remaining in existence, threw themselves against the Kalari swarm.
The battle that followed was the most brutal in collective history.
Korveth watched as ships he had known for centuries, vessels that had carried him between stars, that had stood as symbols of collective power and permanence, were torn apart or consumed by the Kalari advance. The Third Fleet fought with everything they had, employing tactics of desperation and sacrifice that would have been unthinkable days before. And slowly, impossibly, they began to lose.
"Ambassador, we're receiving a communication. Priority override."
The display shifted, the battle imagery replaced by the face of Director Webb.
Behind him, the command center was a hive of activity, humans moving with purpose between stations, voices calling out coordinates and status reports.
Ambassador Corveth, I'm sending you coordinates for a rally point. Your ship needs to leave Earth space now and proceed to these coordinates. Do you understand?
The homeworld
Is lost. Webb's voice was flat, carrying the terrible weight of certainty. The Kolari will take the planet within the next 2 hours. But the human fleet is en route. If your people can hold the escape corridors long enough for evacuation, we can extract significant portions of the civilian population.
How many? Unknown. Millions, possibly. Maybe more if your admiral can buy us time.
Millions out of a population of 19 billion, a fraction of what the collective had once been.
But not zero. Not extinction.
I understand.
Corveth turned to Myrith. Set course for the coordinates Director Webb is sending. Maximum speed.
At once, Ambassador.
The ascending light's engines engaged, pulling the small diplomatic vessel away from the blue marble of Earth and into the vast emptiness between stars. Behind them, the human stations were coming alive with activity, docking clamps releasing, navigation lights blazing, the slow awakening of a war machine that had been sleeping for nearly a century.
And ahead, in the darkness of space, the first human warships were beginning their deployment.
Corveth would remember what he saw in the following hours for the rest of his long life. The human fleet did not emerge from fold space like conventional forces, appearing in a single burst of displaced energy, vessels arranged in formation, commanders broadcasting challenges and demands. Instead, they simply arrived. One moment, the space around the collective's homeworld was filled only with the chaos of battle, Kolari vessels swarming over the dying remnants of the Third Fleet, escape ships fleeing in all directions, the planet itself beginning to show the dark marks of surface bombardment.
The next moment, humanity was there.
They came in waves, thousands upon thousands of ships appearing across every vector of approach simultaneously. They came without fanfare, without announcement, without the boasts and ultimatums that traditionally preceded military engagement. They came in silence, their vessels gray and functional, their formations arranged not for display, but for maximum tactical efficiency.
And they began killing.
Corveth watched from the observation deck of the ascending light as the first human destroyers engaged the Kolari perimeter. Their weapons were unlike anything in the collective's arsenal, beams of focused energy that burned at frequencies the Kolari could not absorb, warheads that released payloads of something that caused the organic hulls to tear themselves apart from within. The Kolari, who had never faced an enemy they could not consume, who had absorbed the knowledge and capabilities of 100 conquered civilizations, began to die.
Ambassador, are you seeing this? Myrith's voice was hushed with awe.
I am seeing it. A Kolari battle carrier, one of the massive vessels that served as mobile processing centers for absorbed populations, attempted to engage a formation of human cruisers. Its tentacle weapons lashed out, seeking to attach and consume. The human ships did not evade. Instead, they accelerated into the attack, their hulls flashing with some kind of defensive energy that prevented the Kolari from achieving the merger they sought. Denied their primary attack mode, the Kolari faltered. In that moment of confusion, the human ships unleashed a coordinated barrage that tore the battle carrier apart in a cascade of internal explosions. More human vessels were arriving by the minute, carriers disgorging swarms of fighters that harried the Kolari flanks, heavy cruisers anchoring defensive lines that allowed the remaining collective ships to retreat and regroup. Enormous vessels that Corveth had no classification for, whose weapons carved paths of destruction through the enemy formation like agricultural machinery harvesting grain.
"This is impossible," Corveth heard himself say. "No species could build such a force in secret. No civilization could coordinate such an operation without decades of planning."
But even as he spoke, he understood.
The humans had been planning for decades, for nearly a century. From the moment they had reached the stars and discovered the nature of the galaxy they had entered, they had been preparing for exactly this kind of conflict. They had stayed quiet. They had stayed small. They had let the galaxy believe they were primitive, inconsequential, not worth the effort of conquest or the trouble of alliance. And all the while, they had been building. The battle for the collective's homeworld lasted 14 hours. By the end of the first hour, the human fleet had established orbital supremacy. By the third hour, they had driven the Kalari back from the planet's immediate vicinity. By the sixth hour, they had begun landing ground forces to establish evacuation zones for the civilian population. Corveth watched it all from the safety of the rally point, surrounded by the battered remnants of the Third Fleet and a growing flotilla of civilian vessels that had escaped the initial attack. Around them, human ships maintained a defensive perimeter, their weapons systems active, their crews visible through viewports as they worked with quiet efficiency. The reports that came in told a story that would reshape galactic history.
The Kalari, for the first time in their expansion, were being pushed back. Their adaptive biology, which had proven invincible against conventional weapons, could not cope with the carefully designed human arsenal. Their tactical doctrine, which relied on absorbing enemy knowledge and capabilities, failed against an enemy whose ships were automated beyond anything the Kalari could process. And most importantly, their psychological advantage, the terror that had paralyzed every civilization they had encountered, shattered against the human response. The humans were not afraid. They fought with a calm precision that was almost mechanical, executing complex tactical maneuvers without hesitation, sacrificing ships when necessary to achieve strategic objectives, never breaking formation, never panicking, never showing the kind of desperate improvisation that had characterized every other species' response to the Kalari. They had, Corveth realized, rehearsed this. They had simulated these battles countless times. They had studied the Kalari, analyzed their tactics, developed counters to every possible scenario. They had, impossible as it seemed, been ready. At hour 12, a human shuttle docked with the ascending light. The young officer who came aboard was unremarkable in appearance. Average height, brown hair, eyes that held the particular focus of military training. She introduced herself as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, the daughter, Corveth later learned, of the station commander who had first welcomed him to Earth orbit.
"Ambassador Corveth," she said, offering a crisp salute that he did not know how to interpret. "Director Webb has sent me to inform you of our current status and to offer you transport to our command vessel."
Transport?
The battle is effectively won. What remains of the Kalari force is being contained and eliminated. However, Director Webb believes there are matters we should discuss before our fleets proceed further into Council space. Corveth felt something shift in his understanding. Further into Council space?
Sir, the Kalari attacked 12 systems simultaneously. The collective's homeworld was only one target. As we speak, human forces are engaging Kalari elements across the former Council territories. We expect to have the immediate threat neutralized within the next 48 hours.
48 hours? Corveth repeated the words as if they were in an alien language. To neutralize a threat that has been conquering civilizations for decades?
Lieutenant Commander Chen's expression remained professionally neutral. The Kalari are formidable, Ambassador, but they've never fought us before. They don't know how to fight us. And by the time they learn... She paused, and for just a moment, something cold flickered behind her eyes. By the time they learn, there won't be enough of them left to pass on that knowledge. The human command vessel was called Perseverance, a name that, Corveth later learned, carried deep significance in human culture. It was one of the largest ships he had ever seen, a mobile fortress nearly 5 kilometers long, its hull bristling with weapons systems and sensor arrays.
Director Webb met him in a conference room that offered a panoramic view of the ongoing battle. The Kalari presence had been reduced to scattered remnants, their surviving vessels fleeing in all directions as human task forces hunted them down with methodical efficiency.
Ambassador, Webb said, gesturing for Corveth to sit, I'm glad you accepted our invitation.
I'm not certain accepted is the accurate word. I am here because the alternative was to drift helplessly in the ruins of my civilization.
Fair enough. Webb sat across from him, his posture relaxed despite the circumstances. Then let me be direct. The Kalari threat is being neutralized. Within the next several days, human forces will have secured all remaining Council territories and established defensive perimeters against any further Kalari expansion. After that,
we need to discuss the future. Your future. The collective's future. The future of whatever form of galactic governance emerges from this catastrophe.
Corveth felt a cold certainty settling into his consciousness. You want something in return for your intervention.
Want? Webb considered the word. No, Ambassador. Humanity doesn't want anything from the Council. We could have sat out this war entirely, let the Kalari finish what they started, and then dealt with whatever remained. Our position would have been even stronger. We'd be negotiating with weakened survivors rather than grateful allies.
Then why didn't you?
Webb was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that Corveth had not heard before.
Do you know what happens when one nation on our world watches another nation committing atrocities? Throughout most of our history, the answer was nothing. We had our own problems, our own concerns, our own reasons for staying uninvolved. We watched genocides happen and told ourselves it wasn't our business. We let millions die because helping them would have been expensive or complicated or politically inconvenient.
He stood, moving to the viewport. And then we learned to regret. We built memorials to our own cowardice. We created institutions whose sole purpose was to ensure we would never again stand by while innocents suffered. We failed, often. We made mistakes, always. But we tried to become the species we wished we had always been.
He turned back to face Corveth.
The Kalari were going to kill trillions of sentient beings. They were going to absorb civilizations that had existed for millennia, erase cultures that had produced art and philosophy and science beyond anything we could imagine. And we had the power to stop them.
So you did?
So we did, Webb nodded. Not because we wanted something, not because we expected gratitude, but because it was the right thing to do. And because...
He paused, a faint smile touching his lips.
And because when your council threatened to destroy our planet, they gave us the moral clarity we needed. They made it impossible for us to remain neutral. They forced us to choose between watching you die and proving that humanity is better than the worst fears of the galaxy.
Corveth sat in silence, processing the implications. A species that had been dismissed as primitive, inconsequential, not worth the effort of conquest or the trouble of alliance. A species that had been threatened with extinction for the crime of neutrality.
And that species had responded not with vengeance, not with demands, not with the kind of triumphalism that would have been justified by their overwhelming power. They had responded by saving their would-be destroyers.
What happens now? Corveth asked quietly.
Now? Webb turned back to the viewport, to the stars that had witnessed the death of an empire and the birth of something new. Now we rebuild. Together, if you're willing. The collective, the council remnants, the survivors of 100 conquered worlds, they're all going to need help. Infrastructure, defense, governance, all of it has to be reconstructed.
And humans will lead this reconstruction?
No. Webb shook his head firmly. Humans will help. We'll provide security while you rebuild your own defenses. We'll share technology where it's helpful. We'll offer advice when it's wanted. But we won't lead.
I don't understand.
Ambassador, the galaxy doesn't need another empire. It doesn't need humans telling other species how to live, how to govern, how to organize their societies. What it needs is partners, equals, civilizations that work together because they choose to, not because someone is strong enough to force them.
He met Corveth's eyes with a gaze that was somehow both gentle and immovable.
We've spent a century being underestimated. We could spend the next century being feared, but we'd rather spend it being trusted. The following days blurred together in a cascade of events that would fill history books for millennia to come.
The Kalari threat was neutralized more quickly than anyone, even the humans, it seemed, had anticipated. Stripped of their numerical advantage and faced with weapons against which they had no defense, the vast Kalari fleets dissolved into isolated remnants that were hunted down and destroyed with methodical efficiency. The cost had been terrible. 17 worlds fully consumed, their populations absorbed into the Kalari collective. Billions of lives lost across council space. The Verith collective reduced to a fraction of its former size and power. The Galactic Council effectively dissolved, its surviving members scattered and leaderless.
But it was not extinction. It was not the complete obliteration that had seemed inevitable just days before. Corveth found himself appointed as one of the collective's primary liaisons to the human forces now operating throughout council space. It was, he suspected, less a recognition of his diplomatic skills than an acknowledgement that he was one of the few surviving senior officials who had established any relationship with humanity before the crisis. He spent his days moving between human vessels and collective survivors, coordinating relief efforts, facilitating communications, witnessing the slow rebuilding of a civilization that had been brought to the brink of annihilation.
And he watched the humans.
He watched them share food with refugees whose worlds had been destroyed. He watched them repair infrastructure on planets they had never visited before. He watched them train collective military personnel in the tactics and technologies that had proven so effective against the Kalari.
He watched, and he tried to understand.
You seem troubled, Ambassador.
Corveth looked up to find Lieutenant Commander Chen standing nearby, 2 cups of some steaming human beverage in her hands. They were aboard Perseverance, in one of the observation lounges that the humans had designated for cross-species recreation.
May I join you?
Of course. She settled into a seat across from him, offering one of the cups. It's called coffee. I don't know if it's compatible with your biology, but it's something of a ritual for us.
Corveth accepted the cup, inhaling the unfamiliar aroma. Rituals are important. They provide continuity in times of chaos.
That's very human of you to say. Perhaps your species is rubbing off on me.
Chen smiled. You've been doing good work, Ambassador. The relief coordination has been much smoother because of your involvement. I have done very little. Your people are doing the actual work.
And yet, they're doing it with collective cooperation, which wouldn't exist without you. Leadership isn't always about giving orders. Sometimes it's about building bridges.
Corveth sipped the coffee, bitter but not unpleasant, and considered her words. Lieutenant Commander, may I ask you something?
Of course. When the Council threatened your world, your people must have experienced strong emotions, anger, fear, a desire for retaliation.
We did.
And yet, when you had the opportunity to punish the Council, to let them suffer the consequences of their threats while you remained safe, you chose to help instead. Why?
Chen was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant.
My grandmother survived something called the Pacific War, she said finally. She was a child when it ended. She never talked about it much, but I remember something she said once when I was very young and very angry about something that seems trivial now.
What did she say? She said that hatred is a fire that consumes the person holding it far more than it burns the enemy. She said that her generation's greatest achievement wasn't winning the war. It was learning to make peace with the people they had been taught to hate.
Chen turned to meet Corveth's eyes.
We could have let you die, Ambassador. We could have watched from a distance while the Kalari finished what they started, told ourselves it wasn't our problem, counted our blessings that the threat had been neutralized without costing us anything. Some of our people wanted exactly that.
But you didn't. No, because my grandmother, and billions of people like her, spent their lives building a civilization that tries to be better than its worst impulses. They taught us that the measure of a society isn't how it treats its friends, but how it treats those who have wronged it.
She paused, a faint smile touching her lips.
You threatened to destroy our world, Ambassador, and we saved yours in return. Not because we're saints, we're not, but because that's who we want to be.
3 months after the battle for the collective home world, as it came to be known, a ceremony was held in the ruins of the Council's former capital.
Representatives from every surviving civilization gathered among the shattered buildings and scorched plazas, standing witness to something that had never occurred in galactic history. Corveth stood among them, his scales showing the subtle color shifts that indicated profound emotional complexity.
Director Webb stepped forward to address the assembly. He spoke without notes, his voice carrying clearly across the ancient stones.
3 months ago, the Galactic Council issued an ultimatum to Earth. We were given 30 days to surrender our autonomy or face military action. The Council believed we were weak, primitive, irrelevant, a nuisance to be crushed, or a resource to be exploited. They were wrong. But their mistake was not in underestimating our military capability. Their mistake was in believing that strength is measured only in weapons and warships. Their mistake was in thinking that a species' worth is determined by its age, its territory, its technological advancement.
Humanity is young. We've been in space for barely a century, while civilizations like the Varath Collective have been building empires for millennia. We have much to learn from you. Your art, your philosophy, your science, your wisdom accumulated across countless generations.
But we have something to offer as well. Not our weapons, though we will share those freely with any civilization that needs them. Not our technology, though that too is available to those who want it.
What we offer is a reminder.
We offer the reminder that no species is truly alone in this universe. That when one civilization faces extinction, all civilizations are diminished. That the measure of a society is not how it treats its equals, but how it treats those who cannot help themselves.
The Council threatened Earth. And yes, minutes later,
panic spread through our population as we confronted the reality of the threat we faced. But the panic did not break us. It unified us. It reminded us of who we are and who we want to become.
And so we came, not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as neighbors, helping neighbors through the worst moment of their existence.
Today, we propose a new compact, not a council where the powerful dictate terms to the weak, not an empire where one species rules and others serve, but a partnership, a genuine, equal partnership between all the civilizations of this galaxy.
We propose that strength be measured not in fleets but in character, that disputes be settled through dialogue rather than destruction, that when any world faces a threat it cannot handle alone, the others come to its aid not because they are obligated, but because they choose to.
This is the galaxy we want to build. This is the future we offer.
He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives.
You threatened Earth in council, and we answered by proving that there is more to strength than the ability to destroy. There is also the strength to protect, the strength to forgive, the strength to build.
Webb stepped back, and the assembly erupted into a chaos of voices, some agreeing, some questioning, some still processing the implications of what had been proposed. But Corvith remained silent, his eyes fixed on the human who had reshaped galactic history with words rather than weapons.
He understood now, understood why the humans had remained hidden, why they had built their strength in secret, why they had waited until the last possible moment to reveal what they truly were. It was not because they feared discovery. It was not because they were preparing for conquest.
It was because they had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the galaxy to need them, waiting for the chance to prove that the species which had nearly destroyed itself 100 times over had learned something from its own bloody history.
They had been waiting for the opportunity to be better.
Years later, when the new compact had established itself as the governing framework for galactic civilization, Corveth would be asked to give lectures to young diplomats about the events that had reshaped their universe.
He would tell them about the war, about the Kalari, about the fall of civilizations that had existed for longer than humanity had been sapient. But mostly, he would tell them about the day he first set foot on Gateway 1, when a young species that had been dismissed as primitive offered him coffee and asked if he required any special accommodations.
He would tell them about the quiet confidence of humans who knew they were strong but chose to be kind, about Director Webb's steady voice promising partnership rather than domination, about Lieutenant Commander Chen's grandmother who had survived a war and taught her grandchildren to seek peace. He would tell them that the most frightening thing about humanity was not their weapons, not their fleets, not the century of secret preparation that had made them the most formidable military force in galactic history. The most frightening thing was their patience. They had been threatened, dismissed, and underestimated for 100 years. They had endured it all, building their strength in silence, waiting for the moment when they could prove that they were worthy of the stars. And when that moment came, when they emerged from their hidden preparations to face a galaxy that had never taken them seriously, they had not sought revenge or demanded submission. They had extended their hand in friendship. That, Corveth would tell his students, was the true meaning of strength. Not the ability to destroy, but the choice to build. Not the power to demand, but the grace to offer. Not the triumph of the mighty, but the endurance of those who had learned from their own suffering.
Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had saved it. And in doing so, they had proven that the small blue world at the edge of explored space was not the primitive backwater that the Council had believed. It was home to a species that understood something the ancient civilizations had forgotten, that the measure of a people is not how high they climb, but how many they lift along the way. The stars had witnessed many empires rise and fall. They had seen species reach for greatness and destroy themselves in the attempt. But on the day when panic spread through the ancient halls of power, when the mighty learned that the meek were not as meek as they had seemed, the stars witnessed something new.
They witnessed humanity choosing to be heroes.
Not because they had to, but because they could.